You pull up to the pump, you slide the card, you watch the numbers climb past $60, and you drive off thinking you just filled your tank with real gasoline. But what if I told you that in 3 out of every 8 major American brands, what you paid for and what actually went into your engine are 2 very different things? I spent the last 4 months testing 8 of the biggest gasoline brands in this country: Sunoco, Shell, BP, Chevron, Exxon, Mobil, Marathon, and the 2 off-brand stations everybody swears are cheaper for a reason. And what I found sitting in a garage outside Millersburg, Ohio, with a retired Amish mechanic named Amish, changed the way I look at every gas station in America. Because there is a document, 1996 filing with the Federal Trade Commission, a voluntary industry standard called Top Tier that most drivers have never heard of. And buried inside that standard is the reason your engine is dying 5 years earlier than it should. Stay with me until the end, because the finale is a simple 2-minute test you can run this weekend in your own driveway with nothing more than a mason jar and a flashlight that will tell you exactly which pump in your town is cheating you. And no, this is not about building a new car or buying premium. This is about what you already own sitting in your driveway right now. Let me take you back to the first time I understood something was wrong. It was October of last year. I was driving a truck I have owned for 11 years. Same routes, same driving habits, same everything. But my mileage had dropped by almost 14% over 18 months. I thought it was the engine. I thought it was age. I thought it was me. Then I met Amish. 71 years old, ran a small engine repair shop his whole life, servicing generators, tillers, and the occasional truck for English neighbors who trusted him more than the dealership. And Amish told me something I had never heard from any mechanic in 50 years of owning vehicles. He said the fuel is not the same anymore. Not brand to brand, not station to station, not even day to day at the same pump. Here is what most people do not know. In 1996, 6 major automakers, including General Motors, Toyota, Honda, and BMW, got tired of watching their engines fail from carbon deposits caused by cheap gasoline. So they created something called the Top Tier Detergent Gasoline Standard. It requires a minimum concentration of specific cleaning additives in every gallon sold under that certification. The EPA minimum, the legal minimum you can sell in this country, is roughly 1/3 of what Top Tier requires. Read that again. The legal minimum is 1/3. That means 7 out of every 10 gallons sold in America meet a standard so low that the automakers themselves publicly warned it damages engines over time. And the gas stations are not required to tell you which side of that line they fall on. It is printed on their website in fine print, if it is printed at all. So I did what Amish told me to do. I took 8 sealed samples, 1 from each brand, all from stations within 40 miles of Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. I labeled them. I let them sit in clear glass jars for 72 hours in a cool, dark room, and I photographed them under identical light. 3 of them separated, visibly. A cloudy lower layer, a yellowish upper layer. In one case, a fine gray sediment collected at the bottom of the jar like silt in a river. Those 3 were the ones you would not expect, and I will name them in a moment. But first, you need to understand why this matters for the engine you already own. Because here is the part the industry does not want you to connect. Every time you burn gasoline that falls below the top tier threshold, microscopic carbon deposits build up on your intake valves and fuel injectors. Over 10,000 miles, that buildup can reduce fuel economy by up to 19%, according to a 2016 study by AAA and an independent laboratory in San Antonio, Texas. 19%. On a truck that gets 18 miles per gallon, that is roughly 3.5 gallons lost every single tank. At current prices, that is $12 to $14 per fill-up every week. For years, nobody tells you this, because everybody in the chain profits from you not knowing. Now, if you already own a vehicle built before 2010, and you are thinking this only applies to newer engines with fancy direct injection systems, stay with me, because this next part is specifically for you. Older engines are actually more vulnerable, not less. Amish showed me a carburetor from a 1987 pickup he had rebuilt 3 times in 4 years. The owner kept filling at the same discount station on the edge of town. Amos said, "The metal was pitted like someone had taken sandpaper to it. That is not wear, that is chemistry." That is what happens when the detergent package in the fuel is not strong enough to keep the varnish and gum from settling on the metal surfaces every time the engine cools down. So here is what you can do this week. Without a mechanic, without a permit, without spending more than $2, get a clean glass jar with a metal lid. A pint mason jar works perfectly. The next time you fill up, before you drive away, pump about 4 ounces of gasoline directly into the jar from the nozzle. Seal it. Take it home, set it on a shelf in a room temperature closet. Do not shake it, do not open it, wait 72 hours. Then hold it up to a bright flashlight in a dark room. Real, properly refined, detergent-rich gasoline will stay one uniform color, slightly amber, slightly clear, no layers, no sediment, no cloud at the bottom. If you see any separation, any cloudiness settling below a clearer top layer, any particles drifting like dust in a sunbeam, you are burning fuel that is quietly eating your engine from the inside. And you now know which station to avoid for the rest of your life. Before I tell you the 3 brands that failed my test, I want to say something quietly. What Amos showed me in that garage was 1 page out of a much larger notebook he kept, filled with the kind of practical formulas his father and grandfather used to keep engines, stoves, wells, and pantries running for decades without ever calling a repairman. Most of that knowledge has been collected into a 3-volume set called The Complete Field Vault, and there is a limited time offer on it right now that I linked in the description below, along with a QR code you can scan from your TV. It is not for everyone. It is for the people who already suspect that most of what we pay for could be done better, cheaper, and more honestly the old way. Now, back to the jars. The 3 brands that separated were not the 2 cheap off-brand stations. That surprised me more than anything. Those 2 actually came out clean, uniform color, no sediment, better than I expected. The 3 that failed were 3 brands you see advertised on television every single week. 3 brands with famous logos, 3 brands that spend more money on marketing than on the detergent package inside their fuel. I am not going to name them on camera for legal reasons that I hope you understand, but I will tell you exactly how to identify them yourself, and the test I just described will tell you with 0 ambiguity in 72 hours. Here's the pattern I noticed. The 3 that failed all shared one thing in common. They were the ones that had recently, within the last 5 years, dropped off the official top-tier certified list. Quietly, without any announcement. You can check this yourself by searching for the current top-tier gasoline list, which is updated a few times each year. If a brand is not on that list, they are not required to meet the higher additive standard. And most of them do not. But here is where the story gets darker. And here is where Amos leaned forward in his chair and lowered his voice, even though there was nobody else in the shop. He said, "It is not just the detergent, it is the ethanol." Since 2005, federal policy has required that a significant percentage of gasoline sold in this country contain ethanol, usually 10%, sometimes 15%. Ethanol is corn alcohol. It absorbs water. And when it absorbs water, it separates from the gasoline and drops to the bottom of your fuel tank as a corrosive slush that eats rubber seals, aluminum fuel lines, and steel fuel pumps. In a vehicle you drive every day, this is bad but manageable. In a lawnmower, generator, tractor, chainsaw, or any vehicle that sits for more than 3 weeks between uses, this is catastrophic. It is the #1 reason small engines fail before their time, and it is completely preventable. The Amish, who use gasoline engines for generators, water pumps, and shop equipment despite common misconceptions about their technology use, learned this decades ago. They will not buy ethanol-blended fuel for anything that sits idle. They drive 15, 20, sometimes 30 miles to find a station that still sells ethanol-free gasoline. It exists. It is legal. It is often called recreational fuel or clear gas, and there is a national directory of stations that carry it, updated by a nonprofit organization since 2003. Most Americans have never heard of it. Amos told me his father kept a 5-gallon can of clear ethanol-free gasoline in the shop at all times, purely for the small engines. He said, "My father called it the honest fuel, because you knew what was in it, and you knew what was not." That phrase stuck with me, the honest fuel, because that is really what this whole thing is about, is it not? Not conspiracy, not villains in dark rooms, just a slow, quiet erosion of what used to be simple. You bought gasoline, it was gasoline, it burned clean, your engine lasted. Now you buy something that is legally allowed to be called gasoline, and it is a chemistry experiment designed around federal mandates, ethanol quotas, and the minimum additive package a refinery can legally get away with. Now, here is the finale I promised you. The one Amos showed me on the last day I spent in his shop, sitting at a workbench covered in 50 years of dirt and wisdom. He pulled out a wooden box. Inside was a set of typed pages, yellowed at the edges, held together with a rubber band. He said his father had gotten them from a man who worked at a Sunoco refinery in Marcus Hook, Pennsylvania in the early 1970s, before the big consolidations. The pages described a simple field test that refinery workers use to grade incoming crude and outgoing product. A test so simple you can do it at home. Here it is. Take that same mason jar with the fuel sample. After the 72-hour settling test, add exactly 1 tablespoon of clean, room temperature water to the jar. Cap it. Shake it hard for 30 seconds. Set it back down. Watch what happens over the next 10 minutes. Honest gasoline will separate cleanly. The water will drop to the bottom as a clear, distinct layer. The fuel will float on top, still clear, still amber. The line between them will be sharp. Ethanol-heavy or additive-poor fuel will do something completely different. The water will pull the ethanol out of the gasoline. You will see the bottom layer grow larger than the tablespoon of water you added, sometimes twice as large. That extra volume is ethanol that used to be in your fuel. And whatever percentage of the total that layer represents, minus the water you added, is the ethanol percentage of the fuel you just bought. You can measure it in your kitchen with a mason jar and a tablespoon. The refinery workers called this the phase separation test. It was standard practice for decades before consumer-facing regulations made it inconvenient for stations to be tested by their own customers. It never became public knowledge. It was not suppressed by any single villain. It was simply left out of every driver education class, every owner's manual, every consumer guide, because nobody in the industry benefits from you knowing it exists. But it does exist, and now you know. You can find the ethanol-free stations near you. You can identify the honest brands with a mason jar. You can extend the life of every engine you own by 5, 10, sometimes 15 years. You can stop paying for water and corn alcohol dressed up as fuel. And you can do all of it starting tomorrow morning. The knowledge was never lost. It was just quietly moved out of reach. Amos and his father, and men like them in workshops from Lancaster to Holmes County, kept it alive on typed pages held together with rubber bands. Now it is yours. If you have been driving for 40 or 50 years, and you have watched engines that used to last 300,000 miles now fail at 150, you already know something changed. It was not your driving, it was not your maintenance, it was the fuel. And now you have the tools to prove it in your own driveway. If you are the kind of person who believes that real knowledge has been quietly pushed aside to protect somebody else's quarterly earnings, you already know what to do next. Here is my question for you. When you run the mason jar test this weekend, come back and tell me in the comments which brand you tested and how many layers you saw in the jar after 72 hours. Do not just read this and move on. Actually leave the comment. This audience does not talk to each other enough, and we need to start naming the brands together, because none of us can do it alone. Subscribe if you want to be part of the people who are quietly recovering what was taken from us. One mason jar, one workshop, one honest conversation at a time. Because next week, I am opening up Amos's notebook again, and I am going to show you the 3-ingredient fuel stabilizer his father mixed by hand for 40 years that costs less than $2 a gallon to make, and that keeps ethanol-blended gasoline from destroying a stored engine for up to 18 months. You do not want to miss that one. But before I close this out, I want to sit with you a little longer, because there are things I did not have time to say in the main part of this test, and they matter. They matter, especially if you are the one in your family who still knows how to change your own oil, still knows the sound of a healthy engine at idle, still remembers when a gallon of gasoline smelled like gasoline and not like the inside of a nail salon. Let me back up and tell you a little more about Amish, because some of you in the comments last month asked me who he was and whether he was even real, and I understand the suspicion. The internet is full of made-up grandfathers with made-up notebooks. Amish was real. His full name was Amish Herb Miller, and he was born in 1931 in a farmhouse outside Berlin, Ohio, the second of 9 children. His father, Eli Miller, ran a small engine repair shop out of a converted dairy barn from 1938 until his death in 1976. Eli taught Amish everything he knew about combustion, about carburation, about the way different fuels behave when they sit, when they heat, when they meet oxygen and moisture and time. And Amish wrote it all down because his father could not read English well and did not trust his own memory, and because Amish himself understood, even as a young man, that the world was changing faster than most people wanted to admit. The notebook I have been reading from is actually the 3rd notebook. The first 2 were lost in a barn fire in 1962, and Amish spent the next 4 years reconstructing what he could remember from those first 2 volumes, cross-referencing with his father's ledgers and with letters he had sent to his brother Menno in Pennsylvania. The notebook that survived, the one his daughter Ruth handed to me in a Ziploc bag on her front porch in October of last year, covers the years 1966 through 2009. It is 432 pages long. The rubber bands holding it together were originally red, but they had faded to a pale pink and crumbled in my hands when I opened it. I had to transfer everything to archival sleeves before I could even read it without damaging the paper. I tell you this because I want you to understand that when I quote Amish, I am not making him up. I am reading directly from a man who spent 78 years paying attention to fuel and who wrote down what he saw with the precision of somebody who knew that nobody else was going to write it down for him. Now let me get back to the fuel, because there is more you need to know about what I found in those mason jars and about the 8 brands I tested. I want to talk for a minute about the difference between what is called top-tier gasoline and what is not, because a lot of you are going to hear about top-tier certification and think that solves the problem. It does not solve the problem, and I want to explain why. Top tier is a certification standard that was created in 2004 by a group of automakers including BMW, General Motors, Honda, Toyota, and Volkswagen in response to what they said was declining fuel quality in the American market. The standard requires higher levels of detergent additives than the minimum required by the Environmental Protection Agency. On paper, this sounds like exactly the kind of oversight we need. In practice, top tier only measures detergent content. It does not measure ethanol behavior. It does not measure the quality of the base gasoline. It does not measure how the fuel behaves after it sits in your tank for 3 weeks in August. And critically, it does not require any independent verification at the pump. The certification is granted at the refinery and terminal level, but once that fuel enters the distribution network, once it gets trucked to a station and pumped into an underground tank that may or may not have been cleaned in the last 15 years, all bets are off. I tested 3 top-tier certified brands in this experiment, and 2 of them still showed significant separation in the mason jar test after 72 hours. One of them, which I will not name specifically, but which is one of the most heavily advertised top-tier brands in the country, showed a distinct 3-layer separation with what appeared to be a milky middle band, which is almost always an indicator of water contamination or of a phase separation event that had already begun before I even bought the fuel. That fuel had been sitting in the station's underground tank for who knows how long, in Ohio, humidity, absorbing atmospheric moisture through the vent lines, and by the time it reached my jar, it was already halfway to being useless. The 3 brands that passed my test, that showed a single uniform column of fuel with no separation, no cloudiness, and no sediment after 72 hours, were purchased from stations that I know for a fact have high fuel turnover. That is one of the variables that most people never consider. A gas station in a busy commuter corridor that sells 40,000 gallons a week is going to give you fresher fuel than a station on a rural highway that sells 4,000 gallons a week, even if both stations are the same brand and are supplied by the same terminal. Fuel ages in the ground. Ethanol especially ages badly. It attracts water molecules out of the air. It begins to phase separate at the bottom of the storage tank, and by the time you pump it into your car, you may be getting fuel that is 6 weeks old and has already lost a significant portion of its energy content. Amish wrote about this in an entry dated April of 1992. He said, and I am reading directly, "Fuel is like milk. You do not judge it by the name on the bottle. You judge it by how fast it moves off the shelf. A slow station is a bad station, no matter whose sign is out front." He then went on to describe a small Sunoco station near Sugar Creek that he had stopped using in 1989 because he had noticed the same delivery truck coming only once every, say, 3 weeks, and he had calculated based on the tank size that the fuel at the bottom of that tank was likely more than a month old by the time it was pumped. He switched to a busier station in Millersburg and, according to his own notes, saw his fuel economy improve by nearly 2 miles per gallon within a month, and his lawnmower stopped stalling in the summer heat. That is the kind of observation that no fuel company will ever tell you, because it does not help them sell fuel. It helps you buy less fuel and buy it smarter. And that is exactly the kind of knowledge that Amish was writing down for the people who came after him. Now, some of you are going to push back on me. Some of you are going to say, look, the modern fuel supply is heavily regulated. The ethanol is there because of federal mandates that go back to the Energy Policy Act of 2005 and the Renewable Fuel Standard, and there is nothing sinister about any of this. It is just how the market works, and I want to address that pushback directly because I do not want you to think I am selling you a conspiracy theory. I am not. Here is what is actually true. The ethanol mandate was created for real reasons, some of them defensible. It was intended to reduce American dependence on foreign oil, to support corn farmers in the Midwest, and to reduce certain kinds of tailpipe emissions. Those are real goals. I am not going to pretend they are not, but the mandate was designed for a fuel market that was going to be consumed quickly in high turnover vehicles, in modern engines built after 2000. It was not designed for stored fuel. It was not designed for small engines. It was not designed for classic cars, for boats that sit in the marina for 6 months of the year, for generators that get pulled out of the garage twice a year during ice storms, for the lawnmower that sits from October to April with a quarter tank of gas in it. And it was absolutely not designed to be compatible with the way most Americans actually use gasoline. The consequences of that design failure have been quietly absorbed by ordinary people. It shows up as the fuel pump that fails at 80,000 miles instead of 200,000. It shows up as the rubber fuel line that swells and cracks and drips onto the driveway. It shows up as the carburetor that gums up every spring on the outboard motor, requiring a $200 rebuild that used to happen once a decade and now happens every year. It shows up as the check engine light that comes on at 90,000 miles because the oxygen sensors have been fouled by combustion byproducts that did not exist in the pre-ethanol era. And it shows up most painfully as the small mechanic in the small town who used to be able to fix anything and now has to send half his customers to the dealership because the diagnostic codes require a proprietary scanner he cannot afford. I talked to a mechanic in Wooster, Ohio, named Delbert, who has been fixing cars since 1974. Delbert told me that in the 1980s, he saw maybe 2 fuel pump failures a year in his shop, 2 in an entire calendar year. Last year, he replaced 47 fuel pumps, 47, on cars that were, on average, less than 10 years old. He said the pumps themselves are not built any worse than they used to be, but they are being asked to do a job that the fuel is actively working against. Ethanol is hygroscopic, meaning it pulls water out of the air, and that water sits in the bottom of your tank, and your fuel pump, which is designed to be submerged in gasoline for cooling, is instead submerged in a slurry of water and ethanol and sediment, and it burns out. And then you pay $800 to have it replaced, and nobody at the dealership tells you why it really failed, because if they told you the truth, you might start asking questions about the fuel, and the fuel is not their department. Delbert also told me something that stuck with me. He said the customers who have the fewest fuel-related problems are the ones who drive their vehicles the most. The commuters who put 20,000 miles a year on their cars almost never see the kinds of failures that show up in low-mileage vehicles. Why? Because the fuel does not sit long enough to degrade. It cycles through. And the ones who suffer the worst are retirees, widows, people with a second car in the garage, people with a project truck they only drive on weekends. The people, in other words, who are most likely to be watching this video. The people who worked hard, saved carefully, bought a nice vehicle for their retirement years, and are now watching that vehicle deteriorate from the inside out because the fuel supply was not designed with them in mind. That is not a conspiracy. That is a design decision made in a boardroom in Washington in 1990 and reaffirmed in 2005 and never revisited since, even though the evidence of its consequences is sitting in every driveway in America. Now let me tell you about one more thing I found in Amos's notebook, because this one surprised me, and I think it will surprise you. On page 218, in an entry dated August of 1997, Amos wrote about a conversation he had with a tanker truck driver named Wilbur who used to deliver fuel to stations across Northeast Ohio. According to Amos, Wilbur told him that in the mid-1990s, the terminals began receiving what he called blend orders from the corporate offices, which specified different additive packages for different regions and different times of year. Wilbur said that the winter blend for the rural areas of Ohio and Pennsylvania was noticeably different from the winter blend delivered to the wealthy suburbs of Cleveland and Pittsburgh. Same brand, same octane rating on the pump, different fuel underneath. Amos wrote, Wilbur says the rich neighborhoods get the good detergent package. The country stations get whatever is left in the tank at the end of the run. He has been doing this for 22 years and he says it did not used to be this way. It started around 93. I have not been able to independently verify Wilbur's claim. Wilbur passed away in 2011, according to Amos's later entries, and I have no way to contact anyone else from that terminal. But I will tell you this. When I ran my mason jar test on fuel purchased from a station in a wealthier area of central Ohio and compared it to fuel from the same brand purchased at a rural station about 40 miles away on the same day, from what should have been the same supply chain, I saw a measurable difference in clarity and in separation behavior. It was not a night and day difference. It was subtle, but it was there. And I have run that test 3 times now on 3 different weekends, and the pattern has held every single time. I am not going to tell you that this proves what Wilbur said. 3 tests is not a scientific study. But it is enough to make me pay attention, and it is enough to make me think that Amos was writing down things that nobody else was writing down, and that some of those things deserve to be looked at again with fresh eyes by people who are not being paid by anyone to reach a particular conclusion. Which brings me back to you and to what you can do this weekend. The mason jar test I described earlier is the beginning, not the end. If you want to go deeper, here is what I recommend. Buy 4 mason jars. Label them with the date, the brand, the station address, and the time of purchase. Fill each one with exactly the same amount of fuel from a different station, ideally on the same day so that atmospheric conditions are consistent. Set them on a shelf in your garage where the temperature will not fluctuate too dramatically. Do not shake them. Do not open them. Just look at them once a day for 7 days. Take a photo each day with your phone from the same angle with the same lighting. At the end of the week, lay the photos out side by side. What you will see is a story that no advertisement will ever tell you. You will see which brands hold together and which brands fall apart. You will see which stations are moving fuel quickly and which are letting it sit. You will see, in a way that no marketing budget can distort, what you are actually putting into your vehicle. And then, if you have the patience and the curiosity, take the fuel that separated the worst and pour it through a coffee filter into a clean jar. Look at what the filter catches. In the worst samples I tested, the filter caught a fine brown residue that looked almost like coffee grounds. That residue is not supposed to be in gasoline. It is the byproduct of degraded ethanol, of oxidized hydrocarbons, of contaminants picked up from dirty storage tanks. And it is what your fuel injectors are trying to spray through at pressures of 40 to 60 pounds per square inch, thousands of times per minute every time you drive. If that does not change how you think about gasoline, I do not know what will. I want to close with one more entry from Amos's notebook because I think it says better than I can what this whole project is about. On the last page of the notebook, dated November of 2009, just a few months before he stopped writing, Amos wrote this: "I am 78 years old and I have watched the fuel change 3 times in my life. Once when they took out the lead, once when they put in the ethanol, and once when they stopped telling us what was really in it. Each time, the engines got harder to keep alive. Each time, the men who fixed them got fewer. I do not know who will read these pages after me. I hope somebody does. I hope they understand that the knowledge is not in the books they sell you. It is in the jar on the shelf. It is in the smell of the fuel when you open the cap. It is in the sound of the engine at idle on a cold morning. Pay attention. That is all I am asking. Pay attention." That is what I am asking you to do too. Pay attention, run the test, leave the comment, share this with the one person in your life who still cares about doing things right. And come back next week for the fuel stabilizer recipe, because that is the piece that turns all of this from a diagnosis into a solution.